Albert Hofmann wasn't intending to invent LSD when he did. In fact, on first pass he assumed that lysergic acid was an unremarkable substance when given the typical battery of tests for chemical compounds. This particular compound was an ergot fungus, one that when grown in rye produces sclerotia growths that are purple and black, so likely to be confused for sun exposure. This compound would later be identified as the likely culprit behind some of the more outlandish parts of the Salem witch trials, due to the fact that people involved experienced behavior that is remarkably similar to the symptoms of rye-induced ergotism. Hofmann didn't pick up on anything unique for ergot immediately. On a whim, he re-examined the chemical. There's some debate as to just how accidental the contamination was, due to the fact that Swiss chemists had a reputation for being very tidy and not really prone to mistakes. But one way or another, Hofmann ended up dosing himself with the lysergic acid, with many theorizing that he absorbed it via his skin, intentionally or otherwise. Not knowing what the sensation was, Hofmann left work thinking he was affected by the volatile combination of chloroform and poor ventilation. Hofmann had wild, inexplicable visions that night. When he unexpectedly was left home alone with his family away, he decided to revisit the compound 3 days later on April 19, 1943. This time, Hofmann took the first intentional acid trip, replicating his self-dosing on purpose this time, and when properly anticipating in a more controlled manner, had an enlightening and spiritual experience that he would value for the rest of his life. Hofmann rode his bike home during this trip, and as a result, it became known as Bicycle Day. In the early 50s, scientists began trying to apply Hofmann's experience to therapeutic medicine. Studies like the one done by Dr. Humphrey Osmond and Abram Hoffer at the Weyburn Mental Hospital in Saskatchewan discovered that psychedelics could induce a self-awareness and change in consciousness that lasted long beyond the trip. A momentary ego death and release from daily baggage, combined with psychotherapy, was found to be effective at breaking the mentality behind addictive structures. And when they'd check in with these patients a year later, they found that they continued on this trajectory. In the 50s and 60s, it was widely seen as the next big thing, with approximately 40,000 patients. Cary Grant was famously among the ranks, and proudly proclaimed his support for LSD. It was also used as a treatment for people with terminal cancer, depression, OCD, and even for children with autism. This might seem like too broad of an application, but it demonstrated applicable results, and was very well documented in these findings during this period. Over 1,000 scientific papers have been published on the topic, and 6 international conferences have been held on the subject. Politics got involved, and, as they often do, they scuttled the advancements being made with psychedelics. 1962 saw Congress pass new drug safety regulations, with the FDA designating it as a research drug. Prominent researcher Timothy Leary only served to put the nail in the coffin on research by ignoring any bad trips that came about from his sometimes poor standards, never missing an opportunity to sell it like he was a desperate has-been celebrity on a late-night infomercial. John C. Lilly also involved LSD in some of his experiments with dolphins, eventually dosing the dolphins while he himself tried to telepathically communicate with them from a sensory deprivation tank. And this says nothing about the weirdly sexual shit that went down with some of the dolphins. Yeah, I don't know what you want me to say. Shit got kind of weird, and a lot of legitimate progress that was made got thrown out because of some people doing some weird shit. Around this time, the CIA also started experimenting with LSD in the form of their MKUltra program, inadvertently creating the Unabomber, as well as the merry prankster Ken Kesey, whose experience with the LSD trials would lead him to write the literary classic One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Kesey's actions would then be documented in the electric Kool-Aid acid test by Tom Wolfe and Hell's Angels by Hunter S. Thompson, which only helped to drive the LSD-fueled cultural zeitgeist. This, combined with a prohibition on its use outside of research, led to it developing a cool factor of sorts. This further helped to drive the conflict between the mainstream and counterculture, and its therapeutic use was overshadowed by propaganda. LSD eventually became a Schedule I controlled substance, which is defined as having no currently accepted medical use in the United States, a lack of acceptable safety for use under medical supervision, and a high potential for abuse. This means that prescription and treatment for using LSD was effectively made illegal. At the end of his life, Hofmann ended up having a complicated relationship with his discovery for this reason, and even wrote a book called LSD, My Problem Child, where you get the sense that while Hofmann valued his discovery, once it left his hands, the results weren't necessarily what he would have wanted. In the right hands, LSD was a godsend, but to poor leadership it represented elements of society that they didn't care for, and thus became a target and a taboo. Hofmann's problem child has come into maturity in recent years, or at least our understanding of it has. In studies and in medical treatments, psychedelic drug therapy was found to be particularly valuable because of what some contemporary researchers and psychologists feel is an over-reliance on selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor medications. Psychopharmacology as a field has stalled, and many patients don't respond to conventional treatments with SSRIs. One reason why psychedelics are thought of as being groundbreaking is because they don't require long-term daily maintenance medications, which are often time-consuming and very expensive compared to psychedelic therapy. Additionally, psychedelic drug therapy is built more on trust and cooperation, as opposed to hierarchical domination, which can be counterproductive in the therapy process. Additionally, a meta-analysis done by Psychology Today found cognitive behavioral therapy to be lacking in long-term results. While studies are often hard to verify, at least partially due to blocks on research, the effectiveness and the long-term results are one commonality between numerous studies. In recent years, there's been some movement in opening the access to research for methods that were found to be effective over 50 years ago, but it's hard to ignore the fact that petty politics has set therapy back half a century. That being said, its mainstreaming represents a new set of hurdles and questions over who owns psychedelics. In May 2019, Denver became the first American city to decriminalize psilocybin, or magic mushrooms. Oakland and Santa Cruz, California followed suit, and in November 2020, Oregon voters passed Ballot Measure 190, which decriminalized psilocybin and legalizes therapeutic use, even though that still comes into conflict with federal law, which still treats it as an illegal drug. By late November 2019, nearly 100 cities were considering decriminalizing psychedelics, according to Decriminalize Nature, an organization whose goal is decriminalization of psychedelic drug therapy. After the decriminalization and legalization process that was experienced with marijuana, there's a palpable sense that there's similar writing on the wall with psychedelics, and a number of companies have innovations seeking to capitalize on this legal shift, while some are just looking to act like patent trolls on a new field. Some new devices that have patents filed include Philip Morris patents around a vape pen that could deliver dimethyltryptamine, as well as other chemical compounds. While this wouldn't actually give them a patent on DMT, it would allow them to take up that space and potentially block other DMT-related patents. The company Neon Mind, formerly known as Flourish Mushroom Labs, filed a patent application for a weight loss program that used psychedelic mushrooms just this past year. Neon Mind also filed similar patent applications for compounds like LSD, DMT, as well as psilocybin to treat weight loss, obesity, and decreasing food intake. Overall, they have 10 patents. Since an LSD trip is typically a full-day affair, psychedelic company MindMed has filed a patent application for ketanserin, a compound that acts as an LSD neutralizer, helping to stop an acid trip from basically being half your day. Ketanserin works by binding to the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor, where LSD typically binds, and if taken before, has also been shown to make trips less intense. One example of some of the more outlandish patents is one that has been filed for a method to use LSD to unlearn allergies. The science is still being worked out, and while this hasn't been solved, it does highlight that it is possible to file a patent based on the description of your invention alone in what is called a prophetic example. This all is still being worked out. And while this problem hasn't been solved, it does demonstrate that it is possible to file a patent application, which makes it sound like our patent system itself is on acid. This legal process that reminds some of marijuana, though, has many nervous, because many are worried that psychedelics are following a similar trajectory, with market consolidation creating monopolists who act as a cartel and move people with genuine interest in public well-being out in favor of investors who only see dollar signs. We have two potential futures here. One, where a new potential treatment method is able to treat people more effectively and cheaply in a way that is better for them. Or one where laws that keep people from receiving adequate treatment are just replaced with patents on basic concepts that demonstrate a potential siphoning off of information for all but a set of privileged dicks. Dicks who just discovered acid in the orgy tent during their corporate glamping retreats at Burning Man and were like, what if I owned this? They're trying to seem like they're cool even though they're demonstrating they don't get the same effect of psychedelics towards cooperation and inclusion and moving away from things like exclusivity and private ownership. They look like Elon Musk after he pretended he couldn't get high on Joe Rogan's podcast and then went on to sell shares of his company for $420, like he was a freshman who smoked weed for the first time and immediately decided to base his personality around it. That's kind of what's happening with Peter Thiel being one of the main figures trying to patent psychedelics and using stupidly broad concepts like having soft furniture, muted colors, a high-resolution sound system, and last but not least, a therapist holding a hand, arm, or shoulder. What's next? Trying to retroactively patent taking a walk through nature or watching a sunset? Most of these items are things that one would probably just want to have if they were going to experience that state, and things that are pretty common to psychedelic drug therapy. Peter Thiel should be the last person who's trusted after his hand in destroying Gawker's media empire over a personal vendetta. While he's not actually patented anything yet, moves like this have many worries. Podcaster and author Tim Ferriss recently tweeted that he was concerned about the effect this patent land grab that's already begun could have on psychedelic research, access, and other issues that come from market consolidation, and asked author Michael Pollan and Rick Doblin, founder and executive director of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS, if there was any legal defense fund or organization of pro bono lawyers to protect patients' interests. In response, Christian Angermeyer, backer of Compass Pathways, the company Peter Thiel invested in, seeking patents in the space, butted into the discussion by saying that this line of thinking was extremely misguided, for touting the fact that it had raised $1 billion in capital, and claimed that by securing patents to protect the proprietary information, his business would be able to reach millions of people. This isn't really an answer to Tim's question, though. In fact, this seems to demonstrate the exact type of territorialism Ferriss was concerned about, since Angermeyer basically responded with how much money he had, without giving context to the figure in relation to what's currently being invested by MAPS or Ferriss himself, by way of his own personal investments of millions of dollars towards psychedelic research, as well as self-organizing the $17 million that helped to start up the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research. Instead of actually answering the question, he let people know that Big Pharma feels entitled to those advancements, and they have the resources to pursue that option. Doblin responded, "Well, it definitely is easier to access capital in the private market than with non-profit drug development." Angermeyer was incorrect in his assertion that patents are needed to obtain exclusive rights to market a medicine, and went into further detail in a set of 4 graphics. Doblin explained that data exclusivity applies for a period of time following the development, but in a way that opens up generic drug development from the data used in its initial development. He went on to explain that while he looks forward to more competitors in the space to develop treatments, there is precedence in the field from the 50s and 60s. So patent trolling in this area is doomed to fail. Reputationally terrible, and capitalism gone rogue. Before ending with, there's massive suffering around the world due to mental health issues, and with enough demand for all the companies to make a profit, even in a post-prohibition world we should all strive to create. Doblin brings up a good point. There is massive suffering around the world due to mental health issues. In fact, this seems to be the one thing people across the board can agree on, seeing as how whenever there's a mass shooting, people default to, well, there's a problem with mental health before leaving it at that. Psychedelics have low cost, less maintenance than SSRIs, and have potential to build trust for patients in ways that conventional psychiatry isn't always able to. There's an opportunity to reinvent the field of therapy, but its successful reinvention is going to be contingent upon avoiding the pitfalls that the pharmaceutical industry has fallen into. If you'd like to do something to help the future of psychedelic drug therapy, I recommend donating to MAPS. I've included links to their website, as well as all the sources I've used in research on this video, as well as Brian Blomer's Bicycle Day, a well-drawn version of the history of the discovery of LSD. I highly recommend it. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up, and if you want to see more deep dives, subscribe, and until my next video, take care.